Greetings, welcome to the studio. Thank you for being here, folks. Much appreciated. Today, I'll be talking about my own work on Bodmin Moor. I'll also be talking about the photography and archaeology workshops that we're running that I'm running in conjunction with Carolyn Kennett, archaeoastronomer. So, before we make a start, a couple of announcements. As a matter of fact, it would be great, before I make the announcements, it would be absolutely brilliant if you could give me a thumbs up if you hear me okay, and also let me know where you're watching this from, either your city, your town, your country. That would be absolutely ideal because we get a good sense of where our audience is coming from. Excellent. Thank you so much. Cool. So, over to announcements. Next speaker, the week after next, the 6th of March. That's not next Sunday, but the Sunday after next. That's Anne-Laure Goet. She's a photographer based in Ghana, and she'll be talking about her own work, Ghana Through the Lens. She's a very good photographer with a background in documentary, street photographer, but also very intelligent, actually very, very acute sorts of images that are very much revealing not just of the kind of moment of that street feel of Ghana, but also give you a bit of a background of a social background to Ghana itself. So it's really, really interesting work. So do not miss it. Make sure that you actually book your ticket. That would be great in anticipation. Further on, the next announcement is regarding our Bodmin Moor workshops. These are run in conjunction with Carolyn Kennett. On the workshops page, at the bottom of the page, we have listed a number of workshops starting in March, in May, in July, and I believe in September. So we've got 4 workshops going on. These are going to be really, really good because we're actually looking at Bodmin Moor, which is a high ground area, which is very, very rich in archaeology. A lot of the stone circles, stone rows that were built there were actually aligned to the cosmos in different types of ways, either solstices or Orion's belt or the Milky Way, and it's really, really interesting. So we'll actually be looking at primarily the hurlers, an exceptional triple stone circle in Bodmin Moor, on the edge of Bodmin Moor as a matter of fact, and we're looking at Roughtor. I'll be covering these areas in the presentation of my own work. These are rich ceremonial or sacred and ceremonial landscapes that were created about 4000 BC. So we'll be spending the day, 2 days as a matter of fact, on this non-residential workshop where you'll be able to choose your own accommodation. And we'll be looking at the archaeology and the landscape. On the one hand, we'll kick off with an introduction to photography, visual seeing, just to warm things up. Then we'll have a look at the different archaeological remains, and then continue with photography as a way of looking at the remains themselves, the archaeological artifacts within context, and the landscape as well. So it's going to be a really cool workshop. It's going to be very comprehensive, and we're going to look at, on the one hand, the archaeology, archaeoastronomy, camera skills, and creative skills, how to make cracking images. So, yeah, follow that up. That would be absolutely great. If you need any, if you have any questions, just feel free to contact me, and that will be absolutely fine. Cool. So, Cameron, good evening. Tuning in from Stonehouse in the west of Scotland. Cameron, hi. Welcome there. Thank you for joining us. That's absolutely great. Cool. Good. So, without further ado, Bodmin Moor, an evocative and Timeless and Inspirational Landscape is the title of this evening's talk. Just close a couple of windows here. Before, or rather as a way of establishing the initial groundwork, my background is in photography and media communications. This is where I'm approaching photography, and I see photography as a powerful means of communication and self-expression. Probably the most, in my opinion, one of the most powerful means of communication and self-expression. If you think that photography has been almost around for 200 years, invented in around about 1830s, you can see that within that time, photography has become ubiquitous. It's in every area of our social life. I would say that you'd be hard pushed to find one day in your life where you wouldn't come across a photograph in some way, shape or form. That may be an ad, that may be a magazine, it might be a cookery book, it might be an ID. But the photograph is going to be there. Also, if you think in more recent times, with the explosion of digital photography and the creation of the internet, so we're looking at the mid to late 90s, that really propelled photography into a different level, never seen in history before. Certainly if you're on Instagram or on any form of social media, you see that the primacy there is the image, the photographic image, video as well, of course, but photography is there, one of the primary mediums. I think that, and this will become more apparent as I actually talk, as I show my work. I think the second thing that I'd like to note is draw your attention upon is this idea of nature. What I can see, I became very interested in issues of nature and culture as a student, the dichotomy, the relationship between one and the other. But certainly over the last 10, 12 years, I've become very interested in nature. And for what I've been reading, looking and exploring, I can actually say that it's worshipped and it has been worshipped and venerated for millennia across cultures and civilizations. I would probably say it's a universal. We have expressions of Pachamama, the Great Spirit, Gaia, just to name a few. And we're looking at elements that are both physical on the one hand and transcendental or metaphysical on the other. Again, I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go along. But now, over to you. If you would like to think about this, what comes to your mind when you hear the word nature? If you'd actually like to write that down in your comments, that would be fantastic. What comes to your mind when you hear the word nature? While you get on with that, I'll make a start. Just to locate Bodmin Moor. Bodmin Moor is in Cornwall, in the southwest of England, right? On the map on the left, and then the larger version of the map, there's Bodmin Moor in darker green, more or less in the centre of Cornwall. You can see it quite fairly close to the coast, near Tintagel, as a matter of fact, Tintagel, which is associated with King Arthur, Knights of the Round Table, and so on and so forth. Bodmin Moor is a moorland. It's open moorland. It's quite an amazing place, although it's small, only 80 square miles. It probably hasn't changed that much over, depends where you go, right? Depends, certain locations have changed a little bit more than others. But you can go to certain areas that haven't changed for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And that in itself is actually quite remarkable. And there's an awful lot of very well preserved archaeology dating back to the Neolithic, 4000 BC. Stone circles, stone rows, different types of architecture, from dating from that time. So it's a really, really interesting place. Now, this evening's presentation, I'm going to be talking about, in effect, my work method. I'll be looking at landscape photographs. I'll be looking initially at my portfolio, my work portfolio. I'll be explaining what that is. I'll be showing you some examples where the image has gone slightly off message, and I'll be explaining that. I'll be showing some of my work, my personal work from my personal portfolio, which is separate from my business or work portfolio. I'll be talking about project research and development, how I approach research and development for my projects, and I'll be showing you a little bit of my workflow as well. Now, that's primarily the preparation and the shooting itself, the selection, the editing process, and the post-processing. Portfolio. In effect, what I'm trying to do, the first thing, because I run a business running workshops, photography work, landscape photography workshops on holidays across Cornwall and Devon, my aim is to prepare a portfolio. In effect, it's a product portfolio. So what I'm looking for is a certain type of consistency, technical and aesthetic, within the images that I actually produce, so that somehow they have a house feeling, an in-house feeling, and it's consistent throughout. So that's Land's End. This is black and white workshops that I also deliver. And just that's the Bodmin Moor page. And we'll be discussing some of the images in question here. This is an early image that I took on Bodmin Moor. Here we're looking at Stows Hill. Early sunrise, very, very, very early in the sunrise. This is dawn. I'm looking at a silhouette here. Again, these are images that what I wanted to convey, and this is where photography for me comes as a powerful means of communication. What I wanted to convey is a particular feeling of Bodmin Moor as an expanse, as a natural environment. It is, after all, an area of outstanding natural beauty, which is classed in the same way as national parks. So it has the same status as a national park. And what I'm trying to actually convey, capture, is the great nature, the vastness of it, the untouched landscape. This shot here is from the top of Stows Hill. The granite formations in the foreground and middle ground are natural formations. You're looking at about 200 million years old granite that was formed back, I think, of Carboniferous or sometime like that. So it's very old stuff that has been eroded and remains there, and is very characteristic of Devon and Cornwall in terms of hilltops are actually topped with these granite structures, which make them quite unusual. Here's also from Stows Hill, looking into Bodmin Moor itself. On the left, you can see the remains of a quarry, an ancient quarry, a Victorian quarry, disused now. This is one of my earlier photographs on the moor. Cornwall has a rich industrial heritage, rich industrial mining. It's a mining area. And this particular engine house is the Phoenix United mine that closed sometime around the First World War, thereabouts. But would you believe it that this was one of the most... produced one of the largest tonnages of copper and tin in the world in its time. So you're looking at a key mine here. And I think this is the thing about photography. Every photograph has its story, and a lot of the times what I'm looking for is the story behind the photograph. What's the story behind the photograph to give it a particular angle? Give us a second, I'll just come back. Sorry about that. So what I'm looking for is the story. What's the story behind the photograph? Is there something to say? Is there something more to say? I'm not just looking for something that is aesthetically pleasing, although that is important. I'm not looking for something that is just technically competent, although that is important as well. I'm looking for something that is more, that tells us about the story, tells us something about the narrative, gives us clues, other clues about the landscape and how we may interact today or we may have interacted in the past. This is another photograph from the top of Stows Hill, again looking at one of the tours, but one of the things about this is that I included part of, if you see part of that rubble in the middle section, that broken up rock, that is part of a Neolithic stone structure, part of an enclosure. They reckon that it may have been for ceremonial purposes, worship and so on and so forth. We don't know. That's part of the mystery of the place. It adds to that mystery, to that thing that you can't quite define. But it's quite impressive. Here we're looking to the west, and in the foreground, those higher points you can actually see is Brown Willy, which is the highest point in Dartmoor with about 370 meters, and Roughtor, the two highest peaks in Bodmin Moor and in Cornwall. Folks, if you have any questions or any comments, please fire away as we go along. Don't wait until the end, because we won't leave questions to the end. I'm actually quite more than happy to engage with your questions or comments as we go along, so that I weave them into part of the conversation. This one here is another photograph at the foot of Stows Hill. Stows Hill was used as a quarry, as a granite quarry. A lot of the granite that you find in London, Bank of England, London Bridge, and other parts of London were actually made out of Cornish granite. And a lot of it came from Bodmin Moor. Some of it also came from Dartmoor. But here in the foreground, you can actually see an architectural piece that was a reject. It never quite actually made it to the final set. So it's been left there since Victorian times. Here we're looking at the western side of Bodmin Moor, and we're looking at the remains, the last standing stone of a stone circle called Loudon Stone Circle. Quite an amazing structure in the middle of the moor. And when I said earlier that some parts of Bodmin Moor haven't changed for millennia, this is probably one of those spots that has been effectively undisturbed for thousands of years. There's nothing there, absolutely nothing there. At night, it's actually quite amazing, because you only see the glow of electric light only on the periphery. The rest is darkness. So there's this huge area of darkness between you and the periphery of Dartmoor, which actually makes it quite extraordinary as well. Dartmoor is an area of dark skies, so there's very, very little light pollution there. This shot here is overlooking, on the left, it's Roughtor, and on the right is Brown Willy. These are the two highest points in Bodmin Moor and in Cornwall. And the area immediately in the middle ground is an area that is rich in archaeology, dating from the Neolithic over to the Bronze Age, a little bit of Iron Age, but also archaeology from the Middle Ages, fields, partitions, and also stone houses that are actually left there. It's quite remarkable because when I first started walking this area, it all seemed much of a muchness. I couldn't actually differentiate things too much, archaeological remains, from just rocks that were there. But once I started reading and learning more about archaeology, I began to actually be able to spot these different features. And it's actually quite amazing, quite remarkable that you just have to walk a few hundred yards and you'll encounter quite a lot of objects, which is totally amazing. The area again appears to be vast, appears to be empty. It's used as a farming area. Although it's privately owned, it is common ground, so people have rights of way. You can actually walk, and it's an absolutely stunning place. This is another view of Roughtor. This is the main entrance near the car park. This is what most people will know Roughtor. This shot was an interesting shot. I set myself up, but the man leaping over the stream, that wasn't made up. That was just chance. That was pure luck, being there at the right time at the right place on a wonderful sunny day, spring in fact. So yeah, I think it's important to, and I'll discuss more of this a little bit as I go on. I think it's important to plan I do quite a lot of planning and research, but also it's important to actually have elements of fluke creep into the photograph. At least that's what I do. And this is one of those cases. Chance. Another thing for my work portfolio is that part of the workshops that I deliver, I take the participants in if they wish in the Land Rover, and that in itself is part of the adventure experience of discovering this beautiful part of England, Devon and Cornwall. And I make sure to include some photographs of my Land Rover, because that is part of the experience that I'm offering. And another one at the base of Roughtor. This one is a different shot. This is taken from a different tour, overlooking Brown Willy and Roughtor in the background. Again, this is an area that is also rich in archaeology, Neolithic and Bronze Age, stone huts, stone walls, small menhirs, and so on. The photographs that will follow are what I class as off-message, although intended to actually be part of my portfolio. They didn't quite make the mark, and I'll explain why. This is one view from Roughtor in the sort of latter part of the afternoon. I think that the outline of the tour is actually excellent, is great. I quite like it. But there's too much foreground or middle ground that basically is a waste of space, where you see that first cow standing, looking at, rather curious at what I'm doing there. The foreground is interesting because that's the remain of some sort of enclosure. However, there's a bit too much empty space between the enclosure and the actual tour itself. I've kept this image because there's one part that's good about it. That's the angle of view. And what I intend to do is go back to this same site, but actually stand more or less where that cow is. And there you can actually see slightly to the right of that cow, you might be able to make out the shape of another sort of standing stone, which I suspect may well be some sort of old architectural feature. I couldn't say what it is, but it could be anything between Neolithic, Bronze Age, or medieval. But this doesn't quite hit the mark, although it's kind of there, halfway there, but not quite. Question from Nicholas. Harry, your skies and clouds are incredibly vivid. Do you achieve this via polarizing filter? What size lenses do you use? 24. Good. Thank you, Nick. Yes, I use polarizing filters. I use a polarizing filter all the time. Right? I think it's my trademark. The polarizing filter will actually be at its best when the sun is at 90 degrees from the filter, right? So it's at a right angle from where you're shooting. That is when the polarizing filter will have its optimum, right? However, if the sun is at a different angle, the polarizing filter will still have an effect. And what the polarizing filter does is that on the one hand, it increases contrast, it'll darken blue, and therefore it'll actually bring out the whites particularly of the clouds. In this part of the world, Americans often comment, they're often quite amazed at the cloud formations that we have being so close to the sea. I suppose that might well be the reason. So yes, I use a polarizing filter almost all the time. And the lenses that I use, I have a selection of lenses. Most of the time I'm using a 24 for most of my work. I use prime lenses, by the way. They're all fast prime lenses. I have a 24, 1.4. I have a 35, 1.4. I have an 85, 1.4. And I have a 50 f2. Occasionally I'll use the 50, occasionally I'll use the 85, but most of the time I'm actually using the 24 and the 35 mil to produce my work. Another one that didn't quite make the mark. Oh, by the way, also Nicholas, in terms of colors, when it comes to processing, I'll also show you some examples of what I do at post-processing to actually increase the saturation and bring those vivid colors out. I think I have to say, when I used to shoot in color negative, I used to shoot with Fujifilm, because Fuji had that saturation that wasn't necessarily warm, as in Kodachrome, like Kodachrome used to be, but it had a particular intensity with the colors tweaked up, and that is my particular style. That is what I actually like to do, is intense, saturated colors, but not oversaturated. Okay, continuing with the off message. This photograph, this was by fluke. I don't normally go out shooting landscapes on the off chance with the hope of getting a good photograph. I tend to research, and I'll be telling you a little bit more about that in a minute. But this photograph was purely by fluke. I was on a shoot on Tintagel, and on my way back I saw this view in the late afternoon, which, as a matter of fact, is a very similar angle of view, if you notice, to the previous photograph, but much further away, quite a few miles further away, as a matter of fact. And I just saw it from my landy, and I just pulled over, trying to find lane where I could actually get a good view of it, and that's the shot. However, there's a little bit too much information in that middle ground area. Although it's interesting, in my opinion, in terms of the windmills, the electric cables, the farms, the warehouses, and the different agricultural uses of the edge of Bodmin Moor, it doesn't quite meet the mark for my work portfolio, my product portfolio. Therefore, it got sidelined. But nonetheless, I think it's an interesting photograph. It could actually fit in within a different context. For example, if it were Bodmin Moor in relation to the agriculture that goes round there, a kind of social, economic activity. But it doesn't fit the remit of my work portfolio. Nick, that all makes sense. I used to use only Kodachrome 64 because of the colors. Yes, absolutely, Nick, definitely. I think you stick to a particular style and a particular look. At Kodachrome, in its time, was absolutely magnificent. And in a way, what I'm actually trying to do is revive some of those qualities, that saturation and warmth. Moving on, another off mark. This is part of a Neolithic portal, 2 standing stones by the hurlers. The stones haven't been touched, so you're looking at the real deal here. They haven't been disturbed as far as I know. And during the day, they're just 2 standing stones. They look absolutely fine. The textures, the colors, the locations. I think one of the striking things is that the stones are aligned north-south. So when you look through them, as in this case, we're looking south, right? You'll see, in this case, you'll see the Milky Way. And I think this is when these standing stones and a lot of Bodmin archaeology really comes into being at night and at dusk and at sunrise or moonrises as well. And this is when you can really see how the builders of the time had a connection with the cosmos. It wasn't just positioning these objects by chance any old where. They were actually aligned in many cases, not in all cases, but in many cases they were aligned, and they had some sort of function. Now, one of the things about Bodmin Moor is that it's an area of dark sky, and I think this is the most incredible thing, that at night, on a clear night, from spring onwards till about early winter, you can actually see the Milky Way with the naked eye. And that is very, very, very unusual because you can't get that sort of view in built-up areas. It's only in an area of dark sky, and there's a few around the UK. Bodmin Moor is one, West Penwith is another, where you get these sorts of views, and it's absolutely fantastic. This image didn't quite make it because although I'm relatively new to astrophotography, learning as I go along, doing that amongst other things as well. And at this stage, I could actually focus on the stars. They're acceptably focused. They're absolutely fine. However, the foreground isn't quite there, although well lit because I lit up the stones. So it's light. So it's an astrophotograph with light painting. Although the stones are well or reasonably well lit up, they're just slightly out of focus, particularly the one in the foreground, which is a shame. It's a crying shame, in fact. However, this is another one that I've actually kept, as I'll be going back there, reshooting, but this time trying to get everything in sharp focus, and I think it'll make a cracking work portfolio photograph. Okay, let me grab just a little bit of water. Remember, folks, if you have any questions, any comments, please feel free to actually include them as we go along. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions, to take on board any comments, any kind of feedback, and I'm more than willing to share any kind of expertise and professional tips that may be useful to you. For my personal work, I started about just under 2 years ago, photographing in Bodmin Moor. I was very interested in the relationship between the archaeology and the space itself, and how the archaeology was actually used, what it was used for. Remember that the Neolithic, 4,000 years BC, that's the beginning of farming. This is the end of one particular way of life from the earlier period, which is called the Mesolithic, where you get hunter-gatherers. You get small communities that are not working the land, but live a lifestyle that is hunter-gatherers. The Neolithic starts with a movement from east to west, people moving across Europe, coming into Britain, creating new communities that are actually sedentary. They stay in one place and they're agricultural communities. This is the beginning of farming, animal husbandry and cultivation. So you have the beginnings of selective breeding. This is where early animal stocks, horses, cows, pigs, goats, begin to actually be selectively bred as the cultivations. Some of the oldest produce that we still eat today is things like wheat, lentils, chickpeas. They date back from that time. So I was quite fascinated with this relationship of the landscape and its history, what had happened before. So what I wanted to do was take a shift from my professional work, from my work portfolio, to actually do something that was different. And I wanted to explore this landscape through the lens of magical realism. Something that was, in a way, not reality, but more a perception of the landscape, how at a psychological, emotive level, I could actually read what had happened before. So as such, it's engaging in a different type of narrative. This is an early morning shot, very, very dawn, almost pre-dawn shot with the moon still up and the sun coming up. And this is Roughtor, the area that is very, very rich in archaeology. And looking at the sun, things like the sun, the moon, the cosmos, would have been an important part of their life. Remember, if you're a farmer, knowing when to put your crops, when to take the crops up, is very important. Time is of the essence. So as such, I would argue that a lot of these stone circles are almost like time devices, a way of reading, a way of predicting time. Again, another shot of Roughtor at dawn. This is from a series. Another one with the sun coming up. This one I took as, again, talk about elements of chance, planning and elements of chance. I planned where to be at that location. That was a very deliberate thing. I didn't kind of find it by accident. I planned it quite carefully. because that's the view that I wanted. But then those aeroplanes happened to fly over, leaving those trails, and I thought it was an interesting kind of an interesting sort of element, because here you have on the one hand this peaceful nature doing its thing, but on the other hand you have elements of culture or human action, not just on the landscape, but in this case in the sky, leaving those aeroplanes, leaving those trails in the sky. So I thought of leaving those. I'll come back to this photograph later on, because I'll show you where it comes from, the contact sheet. These are, again, astro photographs mixed with light paintings. These are actual, this is one of it's stones that belong to a standing circle, Stannon stone circle. Very large stones. This particular monument is untouched, has remained untouched, which makes it really interesting. And what I'm looking here at is at a long exposure of about 30 seconds at about f5.6, f8. And I'm painting with a couple of torches the stones in the foreground. The relationship between the stone circles and the cosmos, the stars, was a great one. So hence I'm actually exploring these kinds of images. Milky Way over Roughtor. This was done in one shot. I tend to do all my photography in one shot. I do not go for compositing. I can't be bothered with compositing photographs. I'd rather spend more time out doing photography, looking for places, doing research, and going out and getting the picture, rather than actually spending time on the computer in post-processing. That's just my style. However, having said that, now that I'm getting more into astrophotography, I can see the benefits of layering as a way of getting rid of noise, as a way of getting sharper images. So nothing is ever fixed, folks. So I'll be adapting that as soon as the spring breaks, as soon as the weather turns, we've got a bit better weather, I'll be out there at night on Bodmin Moor taking some astrophotographs. But this is quite a wonderful example of the Milky Way over Bodmin Moor. It's quite astounding to see it with the naked eye, trust me. I also did, since these, again, this is another stone. This is one of the standing stones at the Hurlers Stone Circle. Since the standing stones were used, and we're pretty certain about this, they were used for sacred and ceremonial festivities, if you want, or activities. I started thinking on the idea of light and dance and music. So these are long exposures that are lit. I built a number of LED rigs and created long exposures and lit up images. So this is a mixture of long exposures, light trails, and light paintings. Another one. Also mixing in available light. You can see some of the lights there in the background. On this one, in the previous one, you can actually see a mast, one of the communications masts, Caradon Hill, above Bodmin Moor. And this is another one. You can see part of Ursa Major, the Great Plough, or the Big Dipper, in the background in the stars. You can see the shape. And in front, I created that shape. Mind you that a lot of these images here, I didn't create that I didn't know what I was doing. It was very much, although I knew what I was doing, I wasn't sure what I was going to get. So it was very hit and miss. So these are elements of chance, random elements that actually appear. And then I was working with other people, dance and performance artists, who also created some of these light trails with the rigs that I built. And I think this is much more experimental. This is taking photography to another level and beginning to actually express something about the sense of place. Maybe it's magic, maybe something that is actually a different type of feeling or emotion to what we would normally see. Somehow reactivating or reconnecting or recreating this idea of the stone circles as places of ceremony, as places of celebration, as places of mysticism. Something that is lost to us in time, belongs to a completely different era. What you can see is the Starry Night above Roughtor and one of the standing stones. And again, I have elements of long exposure, light paintings and light trails using a number of different light sources. Cool. Workflow. Contact sheet. I tend to shoot. Oh, this is a different one. Oh, sorry. That's okay. These slides, I thought they had disappeared, but now they've reappeared. Not to worry. Let me just skip over here. Let me see what I've done. Okay. You can see that I shoot in series. Here, this is a more advanced stage of the project where I actually knew what I wanted to create. I wanted to create close-up images of the stones with the background. So I tend to actually shoot in series. I don't take one photograph. I'm a believer in making the photograph. Photographs are made, not taken. So I'll actually shoot in series. However, at this stage, where I'm actually at a final stage, I knew what I wanted. I was actually quite focused in what I was doing. I took a number of photographs from the type of angle that I wanted, with the lens that I wanted, with the focus that I wanted, but always giving myself an option to actually have a number of images from which to edit at a later date. I post-process using Luminar. I've got Photoshop as well, but I've started using Luminar in the last couple of years as a tool. This is another contact sheet from that shot over Roughtor, looking at the aeroplanes flying over Roughtor. And you can see that on the second column at the bottom, that's the chosen image. But you can see that I've shot a series of images here. And as the planes are moving, in some of them, the planes just appear, and in others, they're more marked. But you can see that in the first frame, top left, there are no planes. And you can see that in the last frame on this section, the planes have already gone. So I selected one where they were kind of halfway, about to meet each other halfway. And I think this is the thing of shooting series. And it's called the shooting ratio. The higher your shooting ratio, the better it is to edit. Normally, I shoot at a ratio of anything between 100 and 300 photographs for one. So it's fairly high. In that process, I have a lot of waste, but what I want to actually collect are all the best shots, the gems, the rubies and diamonds. The rest is chaff, and I don't need it really. This is why I actually shoot a lot. Now, there's no need to shoot too much, because that's overshooting, and then that is counterproductive. But it's just shooting the right amount, enough to give you a selection, enough to give you choice. This is an example of that same photograph of the two aeroplanes, and you can see on the left there's the RAW file. I obviously shoot in RAW. I tend to underexpose by anything between a third, a half, or even 2/3 of a stop, so that then I get more saturation. I get a heavier image, from which I can actually bring out the colors selectively. And I tend to work with color temperature, with color balance, and saturation. So you have the raw to the final image there. And although there isn't an awful lot of work that's been done, it's literally just tweaking, there's a noticeable difference. Here is another one, another shot where you've got the raw and the final image. In the image on the right, the actual color and saturation in this case is I don't do general things, overall, right? Saturation or any kind of changes or modifications. I tend to actually work locally on particular areas. So if I want to bring out blues, greens, yellows, whatever colors I want to actually bring, I'll actually work locally. So it's almost more of a painting tool. So I use Lumina more as a painting tool, which is a different way of working. But again, this is something that I'm constantly developing. Research and development. One of the things that I do if I'm going to a new place, I'll actually look at what images have been produced by others. So I'll do a number of searches, and one of my first ports of call will be an image search. See just what other images are there. I don't want to repeat stuff that other people have done. That defeats the whole object of what I do. I want to actually do photographs that are different, different angles, different views, different times of the day, different light, different locations. I do tend to go to locations that are off the beaten track. Not all the time, but most of the time, because this is where I take my clients to. Some areas that are more kind of on the beaten track, but I tend to go away from those, which makes the whole experience a lot more interesting. So I'll look at what photographs are out there. I'll certainly look at social media, do searches of locations to see what's been done. Another thing that I use is maps. I use a bit of a map geek. I'll use primarily OS maps, the paper version, and in this case, I've on the left, I've actually just marked on Bodmin Moor, Stows Hill, on the bottom right, and on the top left, Roughtor. Often these ancient monuments were aligned on the landscape, but also, so it's important for me to know where I'm at, what is there beyond, right, in that direction. It's important for me to know. But also by looking at maps, and you notice that on the right, you can actually see the altitude, 370, 380 meters high, which isn't that high. However, being close to vast areas of water, the Channel and the Atlantic Ocean, 300 meters is very exposed when it comes to 30 miles an hour winds or gusts above that. They become very windy. So it's very important to actually know. Also, it's another way of finding tracks, routes I can actually navigate. And also, if you notice on the larger map, there's a number of circles on the upper part of that section, and those indicate ancient stone structure. So maps give me a lot of clues as to where I'm going. It's a way of actually pre-visualizing the landscape, being there before I'm there. Another thing I use is the photo ephemeris. Wonderful tool. If you don't use it, thoroughly recommend it. There are a number of other alternative photo pills amongst them. Photo ephemeris actually will tell you where the sun rises, where the sun sets, same as the moon. It'll give you elevations. It'll give you all sorts of details. So you can use it at its simplest or at its most complicated. This is the online version, which is absolutely fine. You just have to subscribe. It's free other than that. The mobile version, which I also have, is paid version and also gives you the night sky. So it's an excellent tool to locate where stars and constellations are going to be and at what time. So these are very important tools. So this is just part of the research that I'll do before I go to a place or while I'm at a place, but certainly before I go to a place. However, best laid plans. When it comes to being in a place, all the research that I've done might end up going out the window. It might be useless, because the bottom line is that I will improvise, I will adapt, I will seize opportunities and persevere. And why? Because I want results. And that's the bottom line. Results matter. I don't want to come back empty-handed. In the exceptional cases when the weather changes, we have torrential weather, then I can't do photography, then the photo trip ends up being a recce. So I'll actually do a recce around the area to find new locations. But if, as long as the weather doesn't change, I will actually improvise and adapt and create openings in order to actually produce the photographs. A lot of the time it depends on the weather, where the sun is, how the clouds are moving, and that direction. So ultimately I'll actually stop and wait. If I've got an interesting shot, I'll wait, because I can actually see that cloud moving over there in about 10 minutes is going to actually create a wonderful shadow. And one of the things that I like is to actually photograph the dappled sunlight on the landscape as the clouds gently move over, having the super wide angle that allows me to do that. So yeah, so it's this mixture of a lot of planning, serious planning on the one hand, but also improvising, seizing opportunity, and really being creative and thinking on my feet. I'm not saying that this is what you should do. I'm just sharing my method. Ultimately, I would advise you, if you don't already do this, I suspect most of you will, if not all of you will, or something along these lines. It's good to plan and it's good to improvise, and you have to plan and improvise in a way that's personal to you, that actually defines your style, and you go with your strengths. Always go with your strengths. And that draws tonight's presentation to a close. Thank you very much. Folks, if you have any final questions, that would be absolutely fine, or any kind of comments, that would be wonderful to hear from you. Thank you so much for attending this talk. I really appreciate it. I'll wait for a little while to actually, if you have any comments or questions, please fire away and I'll be glad to address them. Cool. Okay. Folks, thank you so much. This has been really, really interesting. It's been great. I really appreciate it, really appreciate your comments, and make sure you're here again week after next with our French photographer living in Guyana, Anne-Laure, who is really, really interesting. So make sure you book your ticket for that event. Nicholas, thank you. Most interesting. Now I can see where the color saturation comes from. Oh, well, I'm delighted to hear that, Nicholas. I'm really, really pleased. So that is absolutely great. Good. I'm glad you've actually got something out of this presentation. That really pleases me. Great. Okay. Without further ado, folks, I'll come to a close. Thank you ever so much. Hope to see you next time. Bye for now.